Thanks for joining me for a Kick Up the Arts. I am Nicola Meehan, and we are back in Glasgow's magical Alasdair Gray Archive this episode for a chat with two brilliant Scottish writers and literary leading lights, Rory Watson and Alan Bissett. Rory is a poet, academic and editor, and a former professor of English at Stirling University, whose celebrated work includes books exploring Hugh MacDiarmid, Norman MacCaig, Scottish literature, and he was also the long-time general editor of Canongate Classics, where his paths crossed with Alasdair Gray, among myriad others. His latest poetry collection, The Silver of Old Mirrors, is a stunning, glinting and gentle reflection on a life well lived and a life well loved. And it's also a well-thumbed family album that digs deep on landscape, tides and time. He's launching it in his hometown of Stirling at the library on April the 8th. I've known Rory and his wife Celia all of my life. Their daughter's one of my best and oldest friends. And even back when I lived in London, I'd always visit them when I was home. One of those times, around 2001, we were chatting about books and music as usual, and Rory handed me something from a Stirling uni student that he said he thought I would love. He was right. It was Alan Bissett's first novel, Boy Racers, and since that hurtling, exuberant thrill of a debut, Alan's work as an award-winning writer and performer has revelled on the page, on the stage, and beyond. There's been Death of a Ladies' Man and the unstoppable Moira monologues. There have been plays exploring Pink Floyd's Syd Barrett and Andrea Dworkin, not to mention a short film, The Shutdown, and an excellent pop collaboration with Arab Strap's Malcolm Middleton. More recently, an imagined conversation between Billy Connolly and Alasdair Gray, inspired by a photo of them together in 1981, has given rise to Alan's acclaimed and hugely entertaining one-man show When Billy Met Alasdair. It's at the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow this Saturday night, that's March the 28th, as part of Glasgow Comedy Festival. And so, to celebrate all of that, I sat down with Alan and Rory and we chatted about the wonder of words, the magic of old photographs, the power of listening to women's voices, from mums and wives to theatre directors and pop diviner Laurie Anderson, and we looked forward to their next events. We got a bit nostalgic too. After all, mirrors are always looking back. Do you remember when you first met Rory, Alan?
I mean, I don't remember the first exact occasion. But I would have been a student at Stirling University, an undergraduate student, and that was where, obviously, where all the lecturers are, they're like celebrities, you know, the rock stars in the firmament. But I knew that Rory taught creative writing, and I was desperate to do a creative writing module. Right. But it was way oversubscribed, and I never managed to go on it. So Rory never actually taught me at university, but was around, because I was at Stirling for quite a while. So the further on I got, the more I got to know Rory, and also because he was a poet and a writer. Yeah. We got to know each other that way. Yeah, quite.
Well. Yeah, I think it was one of these things, even sort of learning about you, because I knew you taught at the university, Rory, and then it would occasionally be like, oh, and these are his poems, and these are his books, and here's the historical literature. You know, it's like there were all these different kind of facets to it. But one day I was up from London, up seeing Rory and Celia, and of course, wonderful Jojo, lifelong friend, and Rory, you say to me, I've got a book you need to read. It's the early 2000s. I'm raving about Arab Strap. I'm raving about Mogwai and everything amazing that's happening in Scotland while I'm in London. And he gives me Boy Racers. And you just were so taken with Alan, Rory, weren't you? It's so lovely.
He was exceptional. He really was. He's a very good student too. I mean, you know, he did well at university. Went on to do postgraduate work too.
That's right.
Could have gone further, but I think in the end the creative side of his nature took over. You know?
Yeah, quite.
I didn't have a choice between academia or becoming a published fiction writer, and you know there was only ever going to be one winner. Yeah. But nonetheless, you know, it was a lovely environment at Stirling. I was very happy there.
Yeah, there was such a brilliant sort of history of writers who had worked through and gone to Stirling as well. Like you were from Falkirk, but was it Stirling in particular that lured you? Was it the proximity to home as well?
Yeah, I think it was the fact that it was so close to Falkirk. And it was a big step going away to uni, so going somewhere too far away would have felt terrifying. And, you know, 25-minute drive. So that was fine. And also, it was just a beautiful place to be a student.
Yeah,
it was just a lovely campus. But I was aware that Jackie Kay had also been a student there, and Ian Banks, who I think you had taught.
You taught Ian Banks as well?
Yes, I knew Ian quite well. We got to be good friends. Like Alan, really, we stayed in touch. Until, of course, he died. No, Ian was good fun. I was on the UCAS admissions. You dealt with students for applications to university for a while, in the days when it was teachers who did it.
Yeah, of course.
And I remember Ian's application.
Really?
And he said, what do you want to be? Fiction writer. Wow. Not poet, not novelist, fiction writer. What are your hobbies? Explosives.
Really?
That was quite the usual student. What are your hobbies? I love swimming and hill walking.
There's almost the essence of a short story in a lot of Ian Baggs writing that, isn't it? It's like getting in there and then chucking a curveball, chucking a bomb right under you.
I think he'd written about 2 or 3 novels before he came to university.
Before even that.
He was born to write.
Yeah.
He really was.
I think there's a lovely thing that keeps recurring when I've visited this absolutely wonderful new volume of your poetry, The Silver of Old Mirrors, and I revisited Boy Racers, that very first Alan Bissett novel. And in both of them, selfishly, being from where I'm from, I love that all roads and all rivers seem to lead back to Stirling. Okay, we're barely on the second page of Boy Racers and you've got us in Stirling. Did it seem cosmopolitan from the heady heights of Hall Glen?
Well, it was a university town from the start. So immediately it felt like a level up. It was kind of glamorous, Stirling. There was a castle there and everything, so... And also, while I was a student at Stirling, Braveheart came to town.
Of course.
They had the premiere, the world premiere. Mel Gibson was there, Hollywood had arrived, so it was all very exciting.
It's also absolutely ripe for poetry, and one of the things I always love about hearing or reading or seeing art about a place that you know so well is it can shed such new light on it. Rory, I don't know how many times in my life I have walked up and down your street. I crossed it every day to go to primary school. My grandparents lived on the other side of it. Of course, I was in your house all the time. My mum's still in my grandparents' old house. And yet it had never occurred to me until this wonderful book and a poem called, I think it's called Old News, that you live on a street that is surrounded by a river that runs backwards sometimes. I mean, that's poetry right there, isn't it?
It's tidal. You can't. I mean, you can't resist it. A river that every now and then runs backwards. What a metaphor!
It's perfect, isn't it?
It's extraordinary. Yeah.
Like it is that thing of being right on your doorstep, I think, and just turning it over. And perhaps the longer you are in a place, in a street, in a house, the more detail you can get, the brickwork in the back garden or the river.
I live in Riverside in Stirling, which is a very nice little residential area now, but it used to be the industrial bit of Stirling. There was a cooperage there making barrels, there was a brickworks, and quite a number of other small businesses were there until they started building on it. Our house is 1901. And that's when they started to build houses in Riverside and expand.
Quite. And my mum's at the kind of middle of the loop. So every time we think about this and read those poems, of course, you take us to lots of different places and places and time within it. It's so rooted in that house and in that street. Talking about places and time, we need to reflect on the fact that we are in the Alasdair Gray Archive right at this moment. And my goodness, like it rings out. You can maybe tell us a little bit about both of your relationships with Alasdair and with the archive. There is a photograph on the wall right there, right behind you, Alan Bissett, which has sort of very much formed the extraordinary work that you're touring at the moment when Billy met Alasdair. We did speak about it before for the podcast, but let's touch on it again because you hadn't performed it at that point. It's been a smash hit at the Fringe. It's coming to the Sits this weekend. All of that from this meeting of these two men in this place in time.
Yeah, I mean, I was gifted that photograph by a friend of mine, Roger Glass, who was Alasdair Gray's secretary at the time. And Alasdair had given him that photograph because he couldn't afford to pay him 1 week. And Roger had given it to me because he knew they were two of my heroes. And I've been staring at that photograph for years, wondering what they spoke about, these two Glasgow titans. What was their chat? So I've written a play based around that and I'm performing as both of them and it's been touring Scotland and it's now finally come to Glasgow.
That's it, coming home.
Yes, it was a Glasgow story, so I can't believe it's taken me this long to get it here actually. But the first time I ever encountered Alasdair Gray was actually at Stirling University because as Rory will be able to attest, the corridor of the English department was lined with his his paintings. And so when you're waiting to go in for one of your tutorials, you're looking at them, and I remember staring at one of them and thinking, a bizarre looking thing. Who the hell has done these? I didn't know who the artist was.
Yeah.
But as anybody who's ever seen one of his paintings will know, his work is like absolutely nobody else's. They were very distinctive. And so the Stirling connection, the Alasdair Gray connection, and the Rory Watson connection, they're all kind of interlinked for me, I suppose.
So this is the first time you've been in the archive, Rory, but you recognise a lot of the artefacts.
Yes, I visited his house once. He wrote a very short history of Scottish literature for Canongate Classics, and I was the series editor of that. They were very slim little books, and I mean, it's an amazing little book. The Canongate mini classics didn't last very long, but Alasdair's short history of Scotland is just fabulous. And I got them posted in a big envelope, large sheets of A4 paper, written with a large felt pen. The text came handwritten like that, week after week. He was late as always. Canongate were his first publishers, of course, and they had a terrible struggle getting Lanark out of him.
Not a slim volume either.
No. So it was in the middle of that I had a chance to visit him in his flat, which was amazing. I didn't really know him very well, but I used to meet him all the time in literary events and stuff. He was always there. Yeah. And if you were doing a reading, and Alasdair was doing a reading before you could see your time disappearing as closing time approached. Once Alasdair got started, there was no stopping him.
Yeah, that's it. He's got the stage. The stage is his. The stage is set.
He was, no mistaking, I think the man's a genius. It's extraordinary. Yeah.
I think even the fact that the atmosphere of this very room that we're in what Sorsha and the archive have done with it is unbelievable. The rug under us, the seat beside us, the desk, the use of all the old tins, but also all the art as well. It just feels so kind of living and breathing, which is lovely. You mentioned a slim volume, and that is what this is as well, the Silver of Old Mirrors. There have been pamphlets, there have been a few poetry books in the past. How long in the writing has this book been?
Well, so there are poems in there that are really quite old. There's a poem about one of my granddaughters as a baby in a cradle, and she's 18 now, so that's an old one. There are others that are really written only a few months before the book was published.
Really, so it's up to the
selection of
present day.
It's a selection of recent work.
Yeah.
Voyage Out is a small independent publisher in Dundee, fronted by Kirsty Gunn, the novelist.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And she came to me and said, "Really, do you have anything? We would quite like to publish your work." I was moaning to her about finding. I want a selected poems at some point, and I was moaning I was finding that difficult. And so she came back and said we could do a smaller selection of your more recent work. Yeah. And I jumped at the chance, and they've done this rather beautifully, rather beautiful production, stiff, lovely paper and everything.
It is. It looks gorgeous before we get to the poems, doesn't it, Alan?
I didn't know the name for it until Rory told me, but there's a French flat. When you open the book and there's a flat, which always feels much more official.
Every day's a school day, and there was you saying he was never directly your lecturer. All these years later, and we're still learning. The Silver of Old Mirrors is such a beautiful title for it in so many ways. There are lots of silver linings, there's lots of bursting into light, but it's so reflective as well, and that idea of the old-fashioned photography and even the chemical aspects of how that comes to light are all in this title, aren't they?
With contemporary audiences, I have to explain that these photographs have a shutter speed. They have to be developed by chemicals.
But that silver, that idea of silver, even the salmon is also known as a silver, and the leaping salmon. Yeah. Was that always going to be the title? Was that always going to be?
No, credit to Kirsty and Gail, who are my editors. They're exceptional editors. They were amazingly supportive. They insisted this should be the title.
Oh, really?
There's a kind of poem in there called An Ordinary Day, and that was my original title.
Okay.
Oh boy, were they right. So, Silver Old Mirrors is one of the poems, of course, so it was such a good choice.
Yeah. It's really lovely and very moving knowing your family and getting to some particular poems, one toward the end in particular, and sort of learning more about yourself, because you can't not when you read these poems, but I wonder what that's like for you as well, Alan, because we have one perception of someone, don't we? And the tenderness, not that you're not that like that as a man anyway, but I think just that insight you get into the internal visions and photographs and images of someone is stunning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember you read a poem once about your father's toolbox.
Oh, yeah.
Which I've never forgotten, actually, because I found it incredibly moving. Yeah. And obviously, sons and fathers, I can relate to that. Yeah. I mean, I hope I'm not misremembering it, but it was about you, your memory as a child of looking through your father's toolbox and how solid and important these tools seemed, and how here was you as a man, you not somebody who worked with your hands, you worked with words and books and stuff, and you were reflecting on the difference between you and your dad, and that I could relate to that because my dad worked, he was a practical man, he worked with his hands, and I didn't. And I've never really forgotten that, but it also gave me much more insight into you as a person, rather than just you as a rock star lecturer.
That's a very personal poem. My father was actually a chemist. He was an organic chemist. He was a scientist, but he was good with his hands. And when he retired, he took up woodworking and did things like that. And in his later years, he kind of lost it. He had something, I think, a series of infarctions in his brain and so on. So he became a very mild and slightly dazed person who occasionally didn't quite know who he was talking to. And he was such a powerful, impatient presence in my life that this was a real shock. So the notion that he kept all those chisels sharp all these years and then couldn't use them, that's really what the poem's about. We've touched on that before. It's incredible, isn't it, how something can just absolutely stick with you. But I wonder what that's like for you, Rory, because another idea of photographs is the way that they can fade, of course, and people can fade in time, but they can reveal themselves to you over time as well. And I wondered about the poems themselves. Do you start it and then its essence reveals itself rather than going, I'm going to write a poem about my dad and his toolbox? No, you're absolutely right. I sometimes compare it to developing a photograph. You have to fiddle with it, and gradually things start to rise to the surface, chemical again. And something begins to appear. That's how poems come to me. I'm not quite sure what I'm on about sometimes. I'm really trying to figure out what it is that's caught my attention or moved me or meant something to me somehow. So that's where the poem comes from. So the chisels appeared quite late on in the story. It became you arrange things in your life as ways of talking about other things in your life. Really. So the toolbox is just a way I could speak about these things without saying them out loud, really, in a way.
I love that as we're discussing this. Sounds like a toolbox is being dragged outside the pavement. Life imitating art. It sounded exactly like that, drawn down a box. Is it also a wee bit about sort of trusting, if not the process, the art a little bit to find itself, Alan? Because when we first talked about when Billy met Alasdair, it hadn't been performed. I was sent a very early version of it, was lucky enough to read it, so we could chat about it here in the archive, I guess, just over a year ago. And I loved it, but I was thrilled by the fact that this is something you do a lot in your work, especially in your performances. You're in a kind of conversation. There are various voices and there are various dialogues. Might be you and Andrea Dworkin, might be various Syd Barrett iterations, and certainly with Billy and Alasdair. But the thing that really struck me about it was when you came into it as well, and you'd said you were really kind of concerned about that. It was worrying you, but you just had to kind of trust the instinct you had about it.
Well, I just thought it might be self-indulgent to insert myself into the play when people are really there to hear about these other guys who are much more important and famous and talented than me, that they start talking about my struggle, might just seem as though you're kind of forcing yourself to the front. But what I found when I was writing it was that they had gone, because you think about these guys in terms of their success, absolute giants, but they had struggles. Alasdair Gray felt like a failure for most of his career. He was living in poverty. He spent something like 27 years writing Lanark. Billy Connolly, even at the height of his fame, he said he felt like a fraud. And I think any artist or creative person, any person for that matter, can relate to that, feelings of failure and insecurity. I'm not good enough. you know, maybe I'm going to be found out. So I thought I could find a way of connecting their journey to my own, but also to everybody's in the audience.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did that, because people have said that they felt much more attached to the material after.
Completely. I think the other thing is there's something wonderful about it, because you think, right, I'm getting a handle on this, and you're not. I think it's really important to say, because we've got this big gig this weekend at the Sits, it's not an impersonation of Billy Connolly or Alasdair Gray, both of whom could be in some ways quite easy to impersonate, because they had such very distinct speech patterns and physicalities, but you somehow indicate it's them without actually it going too much into kind of a distraction of who's who.
Well, that was the director, because when we first started rehearsing it, I was doing an impersonation. Okay. So my Billy Connolly was a wee down here, you know, and my Alasdair was a bit like this. And she's like, you can't do that, because people will feel like you're mocking them, or it's a surface level thing.
Yeah,
you know, it's like a Rory Bremner take. It doesn't feel as though it's got depth to it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you bring it a bit closer to who you are, as long as it's clear that you've shifted the energies, people will trust themselves to know, oh, he's being Billy now, he's being Alasdair now. And it will just, you know, if they're closer to how you speak and how you are as a person, you'll be able to access the depths in their character to a greater degree, and that's why you have a director. So thank you, Kirsten McLean.
That's you, Telt. She kept you right.
100%.
She kept you right.
And I fought her on it, actually.
Yeah, really.
Oh, aye, we had a lot of back and forth. I was like, people will expect an impersonation, and she's like, no, they will think they want an impersonation until they get one, and then they'll feel like you're mocking them.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and again, it's just a case of you have to listen. There's so much about that, I guess, listening to the poem, Rory, as well, listening to where it maybe wants to go, or wants to take you, or wants to take us, or whether that's listening to, you know, actually doing as you're told by a director.
You're listening to your subject, yes, listening to who they are and what they've written. The creative writing classes, I used to say to students, listen to what you got, your drafts and everything. Listen to what it's saying to you. It may want to be something completely different from what you started out to write. And at some point, trust the poem and dispense with your megalomaniac ideas. That you
Was it always poetry for you creatively? I know there have been some books as well. Never mind Boy Racers, by the way. Have you ever read Alan Bissett?
What have we got here?
Well, I've got a quote.
Oh.
The Penguin Book of the Bicycle.
Do you know what? I think Rory mentioned this to me one time.
Honestly, right, never mind it. Never mind you and your cars. Late 70s, 78 or so? You and Martin Gray?
Me and Martin Gray. He was a good friend who also taught at Stirling. And at a certain point in our life, we just had to do something else, so we took up cycling, and then became very serious with it. We became club cycle racers, time trialists. And then we said there must be a book, and we couldn't find the book that told us what we wanted to know. And Martin, who's a great one for starting things, just said, well, we'll draw up a draft and send it off. Who will send it to? Penguin. I'm thinking, yeah. And lo and behold, they gave us a contract. And that book has haunted me. It's academic circles, that's the first thing people say when I'm there to talk about something deep and serious.
Listen, I don't think you can get much more deep and serious and philosophical and ecological than this, by the way. This is in the opening. Nothing in nature is more efficient than a man or a woman on a bicycle. And of what other consumable good can it be said that we pay more to get less? Mic drop, that's it, end of. But primarily, creatively, it has always been poetry. Was it always poetry that drew you in, Rory?
Yes. I once found myself talking to McElvaney Senior about he said, you write? And I said, I write poems. He says, all right, bit work.
Oh, really?
So I was never strong enough to write a novel. I think it's not how it comes to me.
Yeah.
That's not how it comes to me somehow. So.
I've always thought of poets as like proper writers. The playwrights and the novelists and the essayists are just kidding on. The poets, it's because they stress over every single syllable, every line break. You know, that like they think about these things to an incredible degree. Everything is concentrated to such an immense degree that, you know, like it feels as though it's like a priesthood in some way.
Oh my God! For very short poems, and I don't really have the stamina, I think, for a novel. And you have. I mean, you've written a lot, and
I've not written a novel since
and drama as well.
Because the plays kind of took over. Because the thing is, in order to write a novel, you need to have money in the bank.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're not earning while you're writing a novel.
Sure.
You only earn after you've written it. So that's the reason why I haven't written it for 15 years. But actually, do you know what? There was a line of Rory's, I don't even think you'll remember it, right? But it was a throwaway line you did in a talk once, and it's never left me. You were giving advice to writers, and you said, make sure you've got a notebook next to your bed, because sometimes you have an idea in the night, and you write it down. And then you said, but sometimes, it doesn't work out. Like, I remember there was one time I look up and I'd written, the skin is mightier than the banana. And everybody laughed. And then I remember thinking, that's a great line. So with your permission, Rory, at some point I'm going to use that.
This takes us back to Billy Connolly, of course, and his banana boots. Everything is connected. But you do have, you have had different strictures, if you like, and different limitations. So, okay, if you're saying it for you, if the ultimate in that economy is of expression is poetry, you have written novels, you have written plays, and of course those a play, a pint, shorter plays. So you do still have these kind of finite boxes within which to work, or a novella recently, relatively recently as well. So
that feels recent.
I know, it feels like last week. So do they all have their own sort of liberating factors, but also challenges?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you're writing a play, a pint, you've got 3 actors, you've got 45 minutes, you've got 1 location. And sometimes those limitations actually produce creativity, because you know exactly what you've got to work within. And sometimes if you've got the epic sprawl of a novel, it's actually quite intimidating. You can go wrong quite easily because you've got so much space to fill. For example, this week, actually, before the Citizens gig, I've got a new play opening at Paisley Arts Centre called Christian, which is about the Paisley witch trials of 1697. And that's a 2-hour-long play. Jeez. And 2 hours isn't that long. But it felt long to me.
I'll bet.
When you used to 45 minutes, you're like, oh my God.
Rory, fill that with a poetry reading.
No.
2 hours.
So long as it didn't feel long to the audience, Alan.
Especially because I tend towards comedy. And you can't really do that with a historical case where, 7 people were executed.
Quite.
And, hanged and burned. It's not very funny. And I looked for the comedy in it, but I couldn't find it. So you need to deliver it with a straight face, which isn't my natural inclination, so I'm a bit worried about this one.
You do have a great, I would say, sort of like a back catalogue of listening to women, though, and bringing their voices to the stage. Moira Monologues is not going, it just will not go away, will it? And that was very much based on these brilliant Falkirk, the mammies, the aunties, and hearing those voices, and again, listening.
Well, I kind of grew up in a matriarchy, so my dad was always working away, my mum had 4 sisters, my dad had 4 sisters, I had tons of female cousins, and the women ruled the family. You go to a wedding reception and the men were sort of standing quietly at the bar drinking pints, and the women were completely took over, and they all used to talk at the same time as each other, but they all knew what each other was saying somehow, and I think this goes in and comes out further down the line as creativity.
Could you always perform? Because again, Rory, I remember us having a conversation and you saying to me, have you seen Alan performing? He is so charismatic, but he is so powerful. Do you remember, was there something early on? Because it's striking, in whatever capacity you're on stage, that's always been there.
Yeah, for Alan, yes, absolutely. And that doesn't follow. Some writers are terrible at reading their own work, and it doesn't work. You inhabit it, but because it's dramatic anyway, so you're inhabiting it twofold. But I think your prose writing is full of tremendous energy as well. There's a kind of energy in your regular writing that you also, it's unusual to see that translated onto the stage in your person. It's there too,
Oh, that's lovely, thank you. There's no performing though like being a university lecturer.
Well, quite,
You had to hold their attention for an hour. About subject matter that wasn't always easy to digest, so that's a particular skill.
I like teaching. I did enjoy teaching. I miss the students. I do.
Very highly regarded. In fact, I remember my secondary school teacher, who also went to Stirling, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to go. She was there in the late 70s, early 80s, and she said, "Oh, who are the lecturers there?" And I mentioned a few names, and I mentioned yours, and she went, "Rory Watson," and love hearts just appeared. You know what I mean? And that was her for the next 12 minutes.
Rory, really?
You know? Yeah,
absolutely lovely. Yeah, which came first? Was it the study? Because there's so many different aspects. You know, I wonder if you're at a party and someone sidles up to you who's never met. You must get this as well, by the way, for the multifaceted career you have had, Alan. But it's like, you know, there's the academia, there's the literary criticism, there's the editing, there's the poetry, there's the lecturing. Like if someone says, "What do you do, Rory?" What instinctively comes first to mind?
I usually say these days I'm a retired academic, what catch a thing. I mean, that's what fed the bairns, you know, and so on. But I wanted to, when I was, my very first book of poems was self-published, was what do you call it, subscription published when I was a student at Aberdeen. And the Aberdeen, published by the Aberdeen Poetry Society, which is me and 3 friends.
Really? That's lovely.
It was called 28 Poems. There were 2 of us who produced it, so 14 poems each. I've always wanted to write creatively, but I've had no illusions of being able to make a living writing.
Sure. Yeah.
Certainly not poetry. And like I said, I was stamina for novels.
Yeah.
And quite a few of my poet friends, younger contemporaries, went on to writing prose because it pays better, you know. And it never pays enough, does it? But it pays better than poetry, for sure. Yeah.
So poetry was first, and academia obviously made that possible, if you like. And was that always comfortable? Because now so often with poets and with writers in general, and it's brilliant because I think for a lot of people who maybe feel audience-wise that it's not for them, seeing it performed live makes it more accessible. But was it always part of it for you, that kind of, that being in front of people, if not performance element of reading your poetry or lecturing, or did you have to?
I think academic writing for me wasn't very different from creative in a way. It was a kind of, you engage with the book and you enter into the book or whatever it is you're talking about, and find things in it that you didn't know were there before, kind of thing. So it's a kind of creative action. And I believe very firmly in lecturing, on standing in a lecture theatre talking about poetry, you have to read it aloud. You really, really do.
Yeah.
Also,
it has to be heard aloud.
Very accessible.
Quite.
You know, it was public facing, it was digestible by a non-academic audience, which isn't the case for all academics.
No.
The language is kind of occult, and it could only be read by a very small amount of people. And the idea that the public might be able to comprehend it would be insulting.
Yeah.
You know, and that aspect of academia frustrated me eventually. I always thought, you know, being an academic should be in some ways a service to the rest of the world.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, because you taught and you lectured as well.
I did. After I left Stirling, I got a job as a lecturer in creative writing at Leeds University and then Glasgow University. But when you're teaching creative writing, it doesn't feel quite as, I don't know, shut away sometimes as English. And no, every English lecturer was guilty of that, but some definitely were. And it was like, you know, but I would think, I'm studying a master's degree in English, and I haven't a clue what you're saying. So if I can't understand that,
totally.
You know,
Yeah, exactly. And also, you want people to understand. You want people to engage, whether that's with your lecturing or your academic writing or your plays or your poems. And so this beautiful volume came out just before Christmas. You launched it in Dundee, and it's coming to Stirling Library in April as well. What's it like for you to then have it out in the world? At what point do you hand it over to the family? At what point do they start, you know? Because I was barely holding it together with some of the poems. It must be lovely for them to...
my wife Celia's heard most of them at some point or another, because at some stage when it's nearly finished, I read it aloud to her with a pencil in my hand, and you know, that's a further kind of revision. So
Celia's an editor as well, of sorts.
Well, an audience. It's in speaking to her somehow, I kind of have to man up a bit, you know. and you know, it's so my children is a different thing. They only tend to see it published. They all get a copy, of course, but like I say, it always should be read aloud. So you'll hear something that doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
I revise all the time, and I've even made a revision or two in this book.
Okay,
already. I've said, instead of it is, I've said it's. It just rings better on the page. Yeah. And that never, you know, again, publishers hate that. Hate that.
That goes back to what you were saying, Alan, about every single word counting and every single even apostrophe counting in poetry. It's just like so
boy, racers as it happens. The edition you've got there is when it came out in 2001, I think.
Yeah.
And 10 years later, for its anniversary, I rewrote it.
Really?
And revised it. And I thought, well, that text isn't so sacred that people are going to be like, how can you do this? You know, it's like... I figured, because it bugged me, some of how raw and amateur some of the prose was, because I was very young when I wrote it, so with 10 years experience I thought I could do a better job. And I'm sure I will look at the 10th anniversary edition now and go, oh God, what? You know, so it never stops.
So we're going to see these plays Friday, Christian.
So Christian's on Thursday. Paisley Arts Centre, and when Billy Met Alasdair is on at the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow on Saturday.
Amazing. And then Stirling Library, Rory Watson.
It's reading in Stirling Central Library on the 8th of April.
Okay. So we're keeping readings from this podcast because you have to come and see Rory reading them live in Stirling, where so many of them are embedded. Are you always writing? Are there always poems?
No, I've never written. That's why I could never be a novelist. I have little bursts of writing, and I'll maybe get 3 or 4 poems out of them, and they'll sit and I'll work on them, and then months will go by. And I mean, for quite a while I was full-time employment as well. So
completely.
But I've never been one to turn out. I have a very small output. 3 or 4 collections is more or less what I have. I'm in about 26 anthologies, mind you. So individual poems are popping up here and there. But no, I take a long time over them, and most of what I write ends up finished somehow. I don't have a huge drawer full of abandoned manuscripts, which is probably a shameful thing to say, because what you should be saying is keep writing.
You said a small, I'd say it's rare. The books are rare, but they're wonderful. Just finally though, dreams appear quite a lot, so I wonder if actually, although you're not actively writing, it seems like your subconscious is maybe doing a lot of that's digging and looking back and reflecting for you.
Those are the more recent poems, yes, and it's really dangerous to write a poem about your dreams. Who wants to know about that? Deadly boring.
The skin is mightier than
exactly.
But the dream thing became a way of talking about time and death and visiting the dead and remembering the dead. So I've got a great quote if you want to hear from Laurie Anderson. This is where the dream poems came from. I love Laurie Anderson. She did an album called Heart of a Dog, and these are lines from a song speech called From the Air. What are days for? To wake us up, to put between the endless nights. What are nights for? To fall through time into another world. That's fabulous, and that's a dream. Yeah.
Wise words there from Laurie Anderson via Rory Watson. Thank you so much again to Rory, to Alan Bissett and to Saoirse Dallas at the Alasdair Gray Archive. If you fancy hearing more about When Billy Met Alasdair, you can listen back to Alan and Saoirse chatting about the play and the archive on an earlier episode of A Kick Up the Arts. And yes, go and see When Billy Met Alasdair at the Citizens Theatre this Saturday, March the 28th. That's as part of Glasgow Comedy Festival. And then, yes, more. Rory is reading some of his wonderful poems at Stirling Central Library on April the 8th. If you're coming along, which you totally should, I'll see you there. And a few other events if you fancy listening to more chats like these live. I'm going to be in conversation with Shetland and Vera creator Anne Cleves. That's in Edinburgh at the Castle. How casual is that? They're even making signature cocktails, and that's all happening on April the 24th. I'll also be shooting the breeze with author and poet Michael Peterson to celebrate the paperback launch of his windswept and brilliant novel Muckle Flugga. That's at the Bookmonger in Bearsden on April the 28th. And then, if you fancy some live music, amazing music, the mighty female and non-binary Hen Hoose Collective are live. That's at Edinburgh Queen's Hall, May the 28th. and I'm going to be joining them on stage to chat about their incredible project as well. Okay, that is quite enough. Thank you as ever for listening, for getting in touch, for sharing, for coming to live events. Thank you for all of it. Bye for now.